Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Unsustainable Wednesdays. Brandon's back from the Jersey Shore. Yeah, how was it? Do you feel different? I've heard that when you go there, you're a changed man forever.
No, it's cold and dumb.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess
not
that
my
could still
idea
change
for
a
what
man.
it's worth, but it is what it is. It was decent, even if in a weird way, it was fine just to be somewhere else for a change.
Yeah. Would you put the Jersey Shore sustainably high?
No,
Okay.
not for me. I feel like it's for like certain people, but the beach being closed doesn't help.
Oh, the beach was closed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why we would go on anyway. It was like 20 degrees.
That's true. It was really cold, but it must have been nice to get away. And what did you get to watch Myself Alone? Or did you save yourself the torture?
I skimmed it.
Okay, that's good.
Just to see if you said anything disparaging.
I tried to be fair. I think I was fair. I don't know. I tried. Apparently, I butchered a name. I got to go back and do that on grammar skill now. Scale.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
It's a rough start.
Anyways, good start. Good start here after the 3-day weekend. So hopefully you all had a relaxing weekend. Sorry we didn't get again to the 10 takes last weekend. It is part of the show still. There was an audio issue and it went weird. One other thing I wanted to mention really quick that was actually on that episode, but obviously didn't air, is that we get a lot of questions sometimes of like where we get IPP and where we get on-ice shooting percentage and all these kind of stats that we mention on this specific episode in Unsustainable Wednesdays. And we actually have a tool on our site that's free to use for anybody. It's called the in-season tool. And essentially you just put in a player and it'll spit back their IPP and everything over their season, their last 7 days, last 14 days, last 30 days, and their last season. And then there's a bar at the bottom that compares their last season to their season to date. So you kind of get an idea of, are they doing a lot better than last year? Are they kind of the same? That sort of thing. So that's where we get a lot of kind of the data and the analysis that we do comes from that. And we built that specifically to research for the show, and then we just kind of turned it into a tool for free for everyone. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. I'll put a link to it down below on YouTube, and if you're listening to this on the podcast, go to fantasyhockeypodcast.com, and there's a tools button there. Click that, and you'll find the in-season tool. Okay, so with that,
it's fed by Natural Stat Trick, by the way.
Yes, it is.
All the data comes from there.
Yeah, thank you to Natural Stat Trick. We took down their servers at the beginning because we built it wrong. They were kind enough to not boot us forever and worked with us so that we can still use it. So thank you very much, Natural Stat Trick. So let's start off with Unsustainably High now, and my first one here is going to be Tom Wilson. Point per game, Tom Wilson. Quite the candidate for Unsustainably High. He has slowed down over the last 2 weeks or so. But on the season, he is just insane. His IPP is at 70%, way higher than it was last year, 21% in fact, and that normally just doesn't happen. And we haven't seen much change in deployment or in minutes, that sort of thing that would justify this big jump in IPP. His on-ice shooting percentage is also a whopping 20%. And on top of that, himself is shooting at 23%. So to me, Tom Wilson's going to come back down. He's probably still, that 50 to 60 point guy, great peripheral guy, great PIMS guy, and great shots. Or not great shots, apologies. He does not have great shots, but, great points for what he offers. Didn't mean shots. But yeah, to me, Tom Wilson's going to come crumbling down at some point. And I don't think he'll necessarily even be crumbling down because he always has something to offer. But I think in a points league, I would probably be trying to ship him off right now.
Yeah. What's interesting is he's well, I don't know. I was going to say he's got less PIMs than usual, but it's not like he's not doing anything there.
He's still serviceable in PIMs, very, very serviceable in PIMs.
Definitely.
But yeah.
One fight and he's right back in it.
You know what this makes me ask though? Would Tom Wilson be better without Ovechkin? Should they get rid of Ovechkin next year and keep just Tom Wilson on the top line?
Wasn't that the plan?
I mean, he's the obvious Alex Ovechkin successor in Washington. If you don't see that, I can't even talk to you.
All right. My first one here is Jordan Eberle, and I'm kind of back and forth on whether he's sustainably high or unsustainably high because he's got indicators going both directions. And let me explain what I mean by that. The first thing that is good about him is that he's shooting more. A player that shoots more is that's the easiest way to become sustainably high in a way is to put shots on net because, you're more likely to get points, both goals and assists. But what's really happened over these last few games is we're seeing his IPP jump to literally 100% over the last couple of games here. Actually, we're recording this on Tuesday night, and I don't think he got a point here against Buffalo, so that may slow him down slightly. But basically, beyond the shots, which is a 20% increase, which is nice, there's not a whole lot to say that he's going to do this well. And you look at the fact that his IPP is so high, I think that's the easiest thing to call out and be like, that's just wrong. Like, that's going to come down. And the other thing is, like, his shooting percentage is higher than normal at 16% now. But he's got almost everything coming off of, like, even strength goals, which are, that's just not going to be sustainable in its own right. He's going to need to be able to get things going on the power play a little bit more than he has so far, if he really wants to be able to keep up any sort of like 60 point plus pace. Otherwise, you're probably going to see him be kind of what he was last season, which is like, a 55 to 60 point player in a traditional season, with like kind of meh peripherals. He makes for a good streamer, and I think that's kind of where he's going to wind up staying. Might be a different story if the Islanders actually had a good power play to work him on,
but that's a lot of hoping.
Yep.
Given the Isles power play that we currently have.
Yep.
My next one here, one of the hottest players on the scene these last few days, Cam Atkinson. Boy, as he had a resurgence. So Cam Atkinson is an interesting one because if you look at him on just the season, right, his whole 17 games played so far, you'd say, okay, this guy is sustainably high. His shooting percentage is in line. His on-ice shooting percentage looks good. Everything kind of looks good with Cam Atkinson, right? And that's where you'd say, okay, all right, this guy's a long-term hold. But he's really exploded mostly just over these last essentially 14 days. So these last 7 games is really when he's just took it to a whole new level. He has 9 points in his last 7 games. In his last 15 games, he has 13. So most of those points have come in these last 7 days. Or 14 days, sorry. So what has happened in these last 7 games to get him to where he's at now? Top 30 in some leagues I'm seeing. In my league, he's top 50. He's just completely exploded. So what has happened? His shooting percentage is 22% over that span. His IPP is 75%, and his on-ice shooting percentage is 16%, whereas on the season, his on-ice shooting percentage is more like 11%. So he's benefiting right now from a lot of luck around him, and on top of that, he himself is shooting at an insane clip. That is not going to stay. Now, because of his increased deployment, his better minutes, and better power play deployment, I could see him get an increase in points by end of year at this point. I could see him be, a 65 to 70 point guy if everything holds and things just go really, really well. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case, especially with Torts, where things can get jumbled around a lot. So on one hand, I think he is sustainably high because of his deployment, and I think he will be better than what people expected and a good just wire pickup, especially with just how much he shoots. His shot pace is ridiculous. But don't expect what's happening now. And I wouldn't even sell him because, honestly, you probably just picked him off the wire. If you're in a really deep league, maybe then you could try to ship him, maybe for someone like Zibanejad or something. But otherwise, just hold. Enjoy the ride while it lasts, but definitely keep an eye on his own shooting percentage and just that on-ice shooting percentage around him as the season progresses. And I would say, honestly, I would not necessarily have a super short leash, but I'd have a short-ish one. I wouldn't hesitate to swap out for a streamer if he starts to really slump.
I'm fairly high on him for the short term anyway. It would take a handful of bad games for me to want to drop him at this point. I have him a couple leagues now.
It comes down to deployment. Right now, I really like the line he's on, but I could just as easily see Torts mess with that, move him down to the third line. Deployment gets all jumbled, and now, sure, things kind of look the same, and I need to wait a long time. But if that deployment is there, I'm not going to wait very long.
Yeah. Okay. My next one is Dustin Brown. Now, I think Kopitar was on here not that long ago, and the story is basically the same. If you look at Dustin Brown, you just look at his chart on Natural Stat Trick or on our tool or wherever, you see a lot of green, but in statistically, like in places that look good for sustainability, except for one major exception, and that is his power play shooting percentage, which is 62.5. He has 5 goals on 8 shots on the power play, which kind of just goes hand in hand with their power play being unsustainable in general. So he's currently on a 44 power play point pace. I mean, last season he was on a 6 power play point pace. 6, like one number, nothing
Insane.
just 6. So you look at that and it's just like, okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't. And that's gonna, just the power play in general is gonna regress for LA. They've just been dynamite on it, and I think it may be better than it was last season for whatever reason, but it's not gonna be this good. And so that you can kind of see that in other stats too, as well, with his shooting percentage and stuff. The funny thing is his IPP is actually like pretty much in line. It's the same as last season, right around 60%, a little below. Although his on ice his on ice shooting percentage is pretty high, but that's in our tool, the on ice shooting percentage is all situations. So that will include their crazy amount of power play they've been playing. So basically, I like Dustin Brown. I mean, we drafted him in several leagues, and we did last season too, despite him not having nearly the point pace. But as a hitter that puts up decent shots and gets some points, everything else is kind of a benefit, like a bonus with him. So I'm happy to have it, but I am also totally understanding when it all falls apart, which will be pretty soon.
So I'm going to stick with the Columbus Blue Jackets and move over to Jack Roslovic. So many things are ridiculous here. Ridiculous shooting percentage, ridiculous IPP of 91%, ridiculous on-ice shoot. Everything possible is just insane when you look at Jack Roslovic. I like him a lot long-term, but don't expect what's happening now. So definitely adjust in your brain your expectations of what to expect from Jack Roslovic going forward, because he's not going to be a point-per-game guy, at least not with these numbers. A lot of other things need to change. I mean, look, there's a lot of positive things, right, with Jack Roslovic. His minutes are really good. His shots are okay. They're not incredible, but they're pretty good. So there's a lot of things. His power play percentage has gone up as well. So there's some good things, but just what's happening right now is really ridiculous. And I absolutely would not expect that to continue.
Yeah. I mean, I like Roslovic a lot as well. But of course, you can't expect what's going on right now.
Yep.
So a player that I'm kind of surprised we haven't touched on yet, and I think we sort of touched on the situation around him and maybe mentioned him in passing, is Nikolai Ehlers. I actually went back because I just assumed we had discussed him on Unsus at some point in the last couple episodes, but we haven't. So let's take a look at Ehlers and what makes him sit on Unsus High for me. And the main thing is his assist pace, believe it or not. I mean, obviously his goal pace is insane too. He's got 10 goals on 4 expected goals for. So, I mean, that's going to come down. His shooting percentage is nearly 20%. It's even higher than that over the short term here. But his assists, you know, this is interesting because, you know, he's got 10 goals, which is a lot, obviously, and then 7 assists. But 6 of those 7 assists are secondaries, which is bad. It means that basically, like, if you're getting a secondary assist, they're not really super reproducible because obviously you don't have the biggest impact unless it's a tic-tac-toe play, which are pretty rare. To have that kind of impact on the play. So he may as well have not been there for most of those secondaries. That's saying a bit much, but bear with me. What's interesting about Nikolai Ehlers is he has an 80% IPP on the season, and that is down 10% from last season. I've never seen anything like it.
That's insane.
Yeah, for an elite player, typically you see 75% is about where players start to top out. I'm going to quickly put in McDavid just out of curiosity and see where he's at for this season. He's at 85%. He was at 78% last season. So Ehlers and McDavid have had similar IPPs over the last 2 years, which is, I don't understand. But you can combine his high IPP with a high on-ice shooting percentage, and it just kind of all falls in line for a story that is probably not too surprising to most of you with Ehlers. Although I feel like I've seen a lot of people thinking that Ehlers is a legitimately good player, and that him being a point per game player or above, which is he is right now, isn't super unlikely. And I agree with that, except for it has to come on the power play. And I just don't see it with him getting 25% power play time. He's just like Dustin Brown last season. He was on a 6 power play point pace, and that's like fairly normal for him, unfortunately. This season, he's on a 16 power play point pace, but that's really the thing holding him back. And it always has been the thing holding him back. And that was the reason why we called Ehlers a sleeper and all this season, was not because we thought he was going to have some breakout even strength season that he's having right now, where he gets, 14 even strength points in 15 games, which just is crazy. But because we figured he's one injury or one trade or one whatever away from top power play. Laine got moved. First thought is jackpot. Ehlers is going to be like a top 50 player easily in most leagues with his shot pace. And what happened was they didn't give him the top power play. In fact, we've seen a lot of cycling around, and he never got the top power play. We've seen Stasny up there. We've seen, PLD is apparently going to be tried there. And it's an unfortunate situation for him. And it honestly, I don't understand it other than the fact that Winnipeg doesn't need him on power play 1. So maybe it's just like good enough. But I mean, you look statistically, Ehlers is like arguably the best player on that team. So it's weird. In fact, the funny thing is, despite how good his season's going, I think the best thing for Ehlers would be if he got traded. It's insane, but that's probably true.
I don't know about that, because his on-ice shooting percentage would probably go down.
It doesn't seem to matter who his line mates are. That's what I'm saying, though.
Yeah.
Last season, he was at 9% on-ice shooting, which is fine. I mean, most teams he'd get traded to would probably have decent on-ice shooting.
Imagine if he was on top power play. Whew.
Yeah. If he was on top power play, he'd be well over 100-point pace right now, which is just insane.
Would be insane. I have one last one here. That's from Chicago. Alex DeBrincat, DBC. A lot of people were asking about him. So he's killing it right now. He's on over 100-point pace at the moment. What's going right for him? So his shooting percentage is quite high at 18% on the season. So I'm going to look at the season for him. It's been even more ridiculous as of late. Last 7 days, 20%. Last 14 days, 22%. That stuff is all crazy. Now, his IPP is what's really changed for him. He's gone from 65 IPP guy more to like 80 in the last 2 weeks. On top of that, he has a pretty high on-ice shooting percentage, and his power play point pace is ridiculous. He's on a 38 power play point pace right now. He was on 19 last year, and this is, of course, assuming 82 games. So, and this power play percentage hasn't changed. To me, I think we're going to see a huge pullback from DeBrincat is going to be from his shooting percentage and from that power play points production. I think that's where we'll see a bit of a pullback from DeBrincat. He's also getting secondary assists a little bit too often for my liking, a little bit similar to Ehlers. Not as crazy as Ehlers, but definitely something that I look at. I'm like, I could see that kind of come down a little bit. Overall, I like DeBrincat a lot. I wouldn't be selling just because who knows what his ceiling is. When you're playing with Patrick Kane, I wouldn't rule anything out. So I don't really want to say he's going to come back to... I don't really know what he comes back down to. I think he has this crazy range of point per game to like a 60-point guy. I think it's that wide of a range of... I don't know what to tell you with DeBrincat. Because he could just have this ridiculous season on Patrick Kane's wing. That power play could just click. There's a lot of things that could go right for him, but a lot of things that need to go right for him for this to continue.
Yeah. You want to move into Unsustainably Low?
Let's do it.
All right. My first one here is Anton Khudobin. A lot of questions about Dobby. I think the thing that is I would point out the most is that he basically got shelled by an amazing Carolina team that just can't do anything wrong. So he's got he played Carolina 3 times already, and then he had one bad game against the Blue Jackets. But I think overall he should be fine, and he might see a little bit of struggles against Tampa. I think the next 2 games he's going to have against Tampa, but then there's a big stretch of winnable games against teams that, I mean, Florida being hot lately, but I still think that Dallas' system is going to work well enough that Dobby will be totally fine.
What about his attitude, though?
Oh, yeah, I don't know what that was all about, but I'm not super concerned about attitude problems with a goalie, hopefully. But we'll see. I mean, if you just starts letting pucks in intentionally, then you probably have a problem. But beyond that, I'm not like the team is playing essentially the same in front of him. Last season, their expected goals against per game was 2.13. This season is 2.17. Like that's the same. So he's I think he's fine. I think when he's not playing Carolina or Tampa, it'll probably be pretty good. We'll see about Florida. I don't even know what to make of them yet.
Speaking of not knowing what to make of teams and people, my first one is Dylan Larkin. And I say this with the caveat that he could be on drop candidates like Monday. But he still qualifies as Unsus Low. Yet at the same time, I just don't see a lot of silver linings. You know, he's a weird one. He just fits the mold of Unsus Low. His on-ice shooting percentage is only 7%. It was 10.3% last year, and that was without Mantha. And on top of that, if you look at the last 14 days, so that's 7 games played, his on-ice shooting percentage is 2.5%. That's a guy who plays 20 minutes a game. His on-ice shooting percentage around him right now is 2.5%. And to top it all off, his IPP is 50%. Now, that's probably because there was probably only 2 goals scored. He was probably involved in one of them. He has 1 point over his last 14 days. That's it. And he's still shooting like crazy. His shooting pace is actually up from last year. And yet his shooting percentage is low. So on one hand, I think Dylan Larkin is Unsus Low because he's on a 48-point pace at the moment. The big thing, though, is Dylan Larkin's pace when things correct 60? Or is it 75? That's what I don't know right now. Because honestly, this Detroit team is god-awful. So bad.
Yeah,
so
and the line
bad.
blending is not doing anybody any favors.
The line blending isn't helping. It doesn't seem like anybody is clicking with him. Maybe Bertuzzi coming back will help. But, man, it has been just brutal for Dylan Larkin as of late. And like I said, qualifies here for this section, but very well could be a drop candidate come Monday.
Yep. My next one will not be a drop candidate on Monday, thankfully. Although, man, is Taylor Hall.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. There are a couple concerning things here, but overall, the thing that bothers me the most is his decrease in shot production. And I think that is probably tied to the fact that they're not playing with Jack Eichel, which I don't understand, but I can't imagine that lasts too long. They did the Skinner experiment for a couple games. They kind of got smoked both games by a stingy New York Islander team, which are trending up, it seems like, lately. And you have to assume they need to put their stronger players together. This feels like the Mantha and Larkin problem, but with an even stronger tandem. So I don't really understand what they're doing, and I expect that they will change that because they kind of need to. The encouraging thing is, despite that things are working on the power play for him. Now it's hard to really look at his like short-term value because he hasn't played in like 2 weeks up till these last couple games against the Islanders, which didn't go well. But prior to that, his power play point pace is pretty good. 37 power play point pace on the season, might even be a little high, but he plays a ton of the power play, still is playing a ton of the power play. And the only real downside is his like literal downside that I think is like possibly makes him worth less than we thought he was at the beginning of the season is the shot pace decrease. But everything else, his IPP is down, his on-ice shooting is right about where it should be. It makes me think that his point pace should be higher than it is, puts him closer to point per game probably, and he's definitely missing on a few goals. He's got 3.5 expected goals for. He only has 1 goal, and that's resulting in a 3% shooting. So this is like 2 down. And I honestly, I mean, you can try to convince me that age is getting to Hall, and that's why his shot's bad, but he is not a 3% shooter, and he's not a 7% shooter, which is what he was last season. So I do think that we see that change for the better. So we'll see a little bit more goals from him, and I think the power play points continue to come. And all the better when, and I do say when, he eventually gets moved back onto a line with Eichel.
Yeah. I've got a pair here of players. One we've talked about on this episode before in the same exact section. And the first one is Roman Josi.
Mm-hmm.
So Roman Josi, you need to be patient with. I am getting concerned about Nashville in general, not so much Josi, but just who is this Nashville team? It doesn't seem like it's the Nashville team from last year. Because when you look at Josi, what's the biggest difference between his 77-point pace last year and his current 44-point pace? It's the power play. You can pretty much point straight to the power play. You can also point to the on-ice shooting percentage because it's gone from 10% to 8%. And that's a huge difference maker. But on top of that, right now, Yosi's power play point pace, 11. Last year, 27. Huge difference. Not much has changed on the deployment. His shots have also come down a little bit. I think that Nashville isn't controlling play as much as they did last year. It's just not working out in Nashville right now is kind of my take. And Yosi's suffering because of that. Now, the question mark here is, do you believe in a resurgence from Nashville or not? Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with my next guy, which is Victor Arvidsson. One of the reasons that Yosi's not getting in on things right now is because of the assists. The assists aren't coming because, quite frankly, the goals aren't coming with his on-ice shooting percentage being so low. And you look at Victor Arvidsson, and lo and behold, he has pretty much the exact same on-ice shooting percentage as Roman Josi. And then you have Victor Arvidsson himself shooting at 4% when he shot at 11% last year, almost 12% last year. So, all things considered, to me, Nashville is a team that right now is just not producing at their normal rate that you'd expect from Nashville. The question is, can they figure it out? To me, though, both of these guys are obvious kind of, well, Josi more than Arvidsson. Josi's definitely a hold. And for Arvidsson, at this point, in a Cats league, I'd have a longer leash just because of his shots. He still does things. In a points league, I would have a shorter leash. And I would need to see results semi-soon. But I do think that at some point, we're going to see Arvidsson turn it around. I mean, his shot production has been really good, and we've seen a 4% shooting. It's just not who he is.
Yep. All right, my last one here is Evgeny Malkin, who's been on here before.
Oh, boy.
But I think considering how high profile he is, it deserves a second look. And I'm going to come into this with also saying that he may, like, how do you define this segment, right? Like, he may, and in fact probably is not worth the place you drafted him anymore, but he's also not a 44-point player. Or I guess, actually, he didn't get a point in this game either, so 42-point player. You talk about problems with the team. Something is wrong in Pittsburgh for this to be the case. They're basically being carried by, like, random fourth liners and stuff, like Zach Aston Reese coming back and being, like, the best player on the ice for the last few games. I don't really have a ton of explanation for this. The shot pace being down is a definite concern. And if that doesn't turn around soon, that is dangerous and makes me wonder how he could drop from, a typical 3-shot a game player down to like 2 shots a game, which is what he's averaging right now. But beyond that, you look at kind of his other numbers. His IPP is 50%, which just means he's not getting in on any of the goals scored when he's on the ice somehow. And everything else is more or less in line. There is a steep dip on the power play, but I actually think that is probably the result of the power play being less dominant. Not necessarily that they're not willing to play him longer on it, but that they're converting less so that unit plays their full time and cycles out as opposed to scoring goals. I don't know. It just seems like something is wrong system-wise over there, and it's affecting everybody a little bit. You could take just about any player on that team right now, and they would wind up in some shape or form on this list right now. Gensel and Crosby are doing a bit better, but they're still not quite where we expect them to be at the beginning of the season.
So that's not true, though. I mean, you look at Gensel, and he's on a 76-point pace for the season. Over the last 11 games, he's on a point-per-game pace. He's torn it up recently. Brian Rust has figured it out. Crosby's figured it out.
Like, it's the top line then that's doing well recently, but still, like, Crosby's not above a point-per-game pace, which is where I'd expect him to be. I'd expect him to be well above a point-per-game pace.
I actually have Malkin sus low.
Interesting. If his shots stay down, then maybe. But
So that's my fear. My fear is that I think his Corsi 4 pace is also way down, in line kind of with his shots, which isn't always the case. The Corsi 4 pace is not, or just your Corsi 4 contributions is not always completely tied to your shots on goal, obviously.
Also,
you might take a lot of shots that get blocked.
Gensel's on ice shooting is like 20%. So his
Yeah, but he's still but if you look at Gensel's last 30 days or his last 11 games, it's only 10.8%.
Yeah, but then
it's
he's
20%
right in line
over
with
the
where
last
he was last year.
Yeah, so he's fine. He's point per game. Whereas you have Malkin, who's not shooting, who's getting in on points at a lower rate, sure, but it's not that crazy if you look at the last 11 games. The last 11 games, Malkin's IPP is 64, which sure it's not. He's quite a bit off from before, but that still doesn't bring him up to what he was. And so I think that the reason I have Malkin on sus low for me is because I don't think Malkin recoups what he was. I think that perhaps we're seeing a new Malkin, and the fact that they're stacking that top line makes me very worried for him. Whereas in the past, it used to be more of a 1A, 1B situation. It's now a clear 1-2, and that 2 is significantly worse. Those players around Malkin are butt. I'm not even going to use the word trash. They deserve butt.
I mean, to be fair, that's what we thought Rust was last season.
We did not we liked Rust.
Nobody knew who Rust was.
Okay, that's
last
fair.
Season.
No one, but that's fine. But he turned it around pretty quickly. I don't see. To me, just the thing with Malkin is he's a guy to me that right now you can probably sell. I don't know if you give it 2 weeks and this continues, if you're going to be able to. I don't even know who to tell you. I don't know who to tell you to target for. Maybe you target Yossi or something like that. But like,
I think there's a major problem that is affecting everybody, including, and the reason we're not seeing it with Gensel is because Gensel's power play point pace has never been great. But everybody else's power play point pace is pretty significantly down. Now, Malkin's is the worst of the lot, but that's a huge chunk that he's missing right now. In fact, it might be most of what he's missing. He's on a 6 power play point pace. He's a 30 plus player. He's one of the rare ones in the league. Last season he had 36 power play points. This season he's at 36 power play pace. Anyway, he did have that injury, of course, because he's Malkin. But this season he's on a 6 power play point pace. I guess the biggest concern for me is shots, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the power play is definitely a problem, especially lately.
I think one thing that is also worrying me is you see guys like, Gensel taking a lot of shots on the power play. And also, you see Rust doing well. Rust is on a 19 power play point pace. Gensel's on a 19 power play point pace as well. And this is just over the season. Over their last 14 days, it's been a lot better for them. They're more on like a 27. So when I see that, I also get the question of like, is it just in a way, maybe it's even just a this season thing, a changing of guards type thing. Malkin's just not factoring in like he used to. I mean,
he's got the same amount of shots as Rust and 1 shot less than Gensel on the power play. He's probably fine.
It's not working out.
I mean, the power play's not working.
The
I don't know what their
average
average opportunity per game is, but I would imagine it's not as high as you'd expect for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately for Malkin, to me, it's just I don't think he's gonna be the guy he was. I don't think he's gonna come close if he continues how he is right now. The shots are the most concerning thing. I think if your shots come down 35%, 36%, whatever it is, like, oof, and your points per 60 come down like crazy. Your course is down, like all these, so many bad metrics are down for Malkin that don't have to do with his points. Forget about points. It's just his involvement on the ice is way down. And that concerns me more than it did before. Now I'm worried. Now if I'm someone, I'm absolutely thinking about maybe selling and maybe trying to get someone that would, like for example, Yossi is a good serviceable, I think, replacement who has good upside. Maybe Dougie Hamilton. I would maybe target defenseman with Malkin. because I think you can make up a center much more easily, right, from the wire than you would a defenseman, for example, if you were going to take my advice.
I do think that if you are going to sell him, the proper target is somebody that had similar upside value that is also slumping, that has numbers that are a little bit more generous for, don't have a big shot dip, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't have any more unsus low. So if you have one
last one.
Okay, so let's move on to sus high after having a good, healthy debate about Evgeny Malkin. Okay, my first sustainably high guy actually was Brian Rust, but we've kind of talked about him a little bit.
Yep.
Everything looks in line for Brian Rust. His minutes are up a little bit from last year, but pretty much sustained from last year, and actually have gotten better from a quality perspective because he's playing with Crosby. And his shooting percentage is fine on the season, has been high over these last 14 days. But I'm, discounting it a little bit. It's not that insane at the moment on the season. He's been fine. I really like what Russ is doing, and I think that selling him would probably be a mistake.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people. I've heard a lot of people talk about selling Rust.
Yeah,
I remember even like a week ago when he was already doing well. They're like, "Oh, do I move like random, like streamable? Do I move Arvidsson or Rust?" It's like, what? Why are you talking about these two players in the same sentence?
Rust?
Stop thinking that Rust is bad. Like, I get you drafted him in like the 9th round, but he's not that.
No, Rust is unbelievable. And he's a very good individual player as well, which is very impressive. Kind of came onto the scene last year too. So that's it. Just Brian Rust. I like him.
Yep. My first one here is Charlie McAvoy.
Ooh.
So we saw the 5 forward experiment in Boston, and my thought, I don't know if I said this on air or not, but I definitely mentioned it, at least in Discord, about the coach. They mentioned that the reason they did it is because of a lack of shorthanded attempts against, and like they basically just felt like they had all this swagger and they can't, their power play is amazing or whatever, which admittedly, of course it is. And then they gave up a shorthanded goal. And it's like, you don't have a defenseman on the ice. So Krejci's great and all, pretty good two-way guy, but I don't think he can skate backwards that fast. And he just got smoked. And it's like, well, that's the problem with running 5 forwards. We've seen that experiment a handful of times in different teams, and it never lasts more than like a handful of games, which is what happened here. So Grzelcyk being himself is out again with who knows what. He may not even exist as a person. He may be phasing in and out of reality. But McAvoy is the quarterback again, and that's exactly what we needed. We talked about McAvoy ad nauseum before the season started about if he gets that power play one, he is a top 5 defenseman in a lot of leagues, especially Cats leagues, but points as well, considering how dynamic that power play is and how much of a difference it makes for a guy that can already get a half a point per game just at even strength, which is tough for a defenseman. Yep. So I do think that considering how well he's doing, I don't see why they would go back to Grzelcyk or Krejci for that top power play spot anymore. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I do think that we're seeing McAvoy be very valuable rest of the season and like a great trade target right now, although he's already done so well that it may be hard to get for anything reasonable.
Yeah, he is locked into that spot now, it seems. Especially after they gave up that shorthanded goal. I feel like it was just, okay, this is yours. Congrats.
Yeah.
My next
Still not
one
a big
here,
shooter, but at least it's better than last season as well.
Yeah. My next one here is going to be Andrei Svechnikov. Now, I still, we had said at the beginning of the season he wasn't worth his draft position. I haven't gone back and looked who went around him again. I'm blanking on that right now. We should do that at some point. I'm still not 100% sure if he is. He's definitely closer than...
The player I always compared him to is Stamkos, and Stamkos is going on average about 5 positions later, which I still don't quite understand, but it is what it is.
Yeah, that was just weirdness. I mean, Stamkos right now is on a 103-point pace, so Stamkos is definitely better there. But anyways, Svechnikov to me, look, I'm not even going to get into the stats. Everything just looks good. The on-ice shooting percentage is the only thing that feels pretty high to me. But other than that, like he's a beast. He's just an absolute monster, and I do see him being a point per game guy this year. That's it. I wouldn't be selling if you're thinking about it
Yep.
in any type of league.
Yep. I'm going to stay in Boston and go to Nick Ritchie,
Ooh,
who's a
yes,
player we
I like
mentioned
this.
a handful of times in different capacities. He's actually been fairly weak over the last couple of games, but he's still doing all the things you need him to do, even when he's not getting points, which is the upside for him. So in points leagues, if he's not scoring and you have a really goals and assists heavy league, then he may not have a ton of value. But I think in leagues where a 60 to 65 point pace guy with he's basically like a juiced up Hornquist, in my opinion, at this point. I think his point pace and Hornquist's point pace are going to be pretty similar. I think they're both going to show up on the power play. And I think that Ritchie is going to have a bunch of shots and a bunch of hits. And that's why you get a guy like Hornquist. And he's a lot younger. So I feel like now that, they've experimented a bunch of times with that top power play in Boston, it seems like Ritchie's going to stick with it. But the thing that I like the most is, and this is kind of to the detriment of a lot of other Boston fantasy value, but if Pastrnak plays on his line for any significant length of time, that's just a net positive for him and Krejci. So I feel like Ritchie is benefiting more than anybody from what's been going on in Boston just in general lately. They cycled the power play all over the place. He was never off of power play one, no matter who was healthy, who was hurt, didn't matter. Ritchie was always there net for presence, just like Hornquist. And now that Pastrnak on his line, he has some even strength upside as well. So, and he's shooting like crazy. I mean, we're talking about a guy that shot like 130 something pace last season. Now he's at 200 pace, and he's going even higher than that recently. More shots on the power play and all that. So I'm really high on him rest of the season in Cats leagues, especially. I have him in a handful of leagues, and I'm really happy to have him. I think we could see we could see him get past 65 point pace as well if he continues to make things happen on the power play.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I have no question about it. So I got to give you credit on this next one. The Dominic Kubalik.
I dropped him at the beginning of the season.
Of course you did. Of course you didn't take your own advice. But I got to give you credit. Yep. So I will say there is weirdness. He's doing a lot with little.
Yep.
And normally when things are too good to be true, they are. But with Kubalik, it doesn't completely seem to be the case. I mean, his on-ice shooting percentage is really not that insane. His IPP is a little high, but he actually had a pretty high one last year too. His shots have gone up a lot, 35%. So his shots are what's doing a lot. It's helping a ton that he's shooting so much. It's helping him get in on those assists. Now, one thing that is a little bit concerning, he does have a lot of secondary assists. His secondary assists are way, way higher than last year, about double last year. So that's the one thing to watch for, is that he is getting a little bit lucky off of that secondary assist. Now, when you look at it, though, what is it that is giving Dominic Kubalik currently that huge bump? It's just the power play. That's it. That's the only thing. He has a 48-point power play point pace on the season. That is not going to stick. That's not staying. Okay. But, he's currently on a 68-point pace. Can he be like a 60 to 65-point pace guy with really good shots? Absolutely. I would expect him to slow down a lot, though, from what we've been experiencing these last few weeks, because all of it is coming on the power play. And I would fully expect that to just kind of simmer down a little bit. But I do like him a lot.
Yeah. My last one here is Martin Nakash. So we had a couple people ask about him. I feel like in most leagues, he's probably still a little bit out of the realm of like a long-term hold more than a streamer. But there are a lot of things to like here. And I think he's sus high because I think he's going to be better than he was last season. He was a 46-point pace guy last season. We're seeing him closer to 60-point pace. And I think, it looks relatively sustainable, all things considered. His IPP is actually lower than last season. His on-ice shooting is essentially the same. And his power play is essentially the same. They just have, a few more tools, so that second power play is a little bit better than it was a unfortunately for Teravainen, who would probably like to find himself on power play 1. I know that I'm probably going to get roasted for us saying that Teravainen is a little risky at this point, and then he gets a 4-point game or whatever it was. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of Teravainen's upside comes on the power play, and if he's on power play 2, it's just net negative for him.
Yeah.
But Necas is shooting a lot more, which is a good sign. His shooting percentage is way down, so he's actually due a goal or two. And he's not getting lucky. He's getting things done, and he's sort of, he actually did last season too. He just didn't have quite the amount of ice time to back it all up. So everything's kind of going up in the same line with his ice time increase. All good news for him, but I feel like if he were on a different team with a little bit less depth, he would be a player we'd be talking about picking up right now, as opposed to, kind of reserving for deeper leagues.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, moving on to Low, the bums. Yep. My first one here. So we had talked about Evgeny Malkin. He was on here for me. Oliver Bjorkstrand is my first one.
Yeah, I got him too.
It breaks my heart to have him on here because on one hand, I still believe in Oliver Bjorkstrand. But right now, the situation is just not there for him to do it. At the moment, his minutes have come down a ton. He's only been playing about 15 minutes in his last 7 games. That is just not good enough for someone to hit that ceiling that you're hoping for. His shot pace has come down tremendously, about 30% actually. So it's just not pretty. His IPP and on-ice shooting percentage are also really good. So he's doing the best he can, and he's currently on a 60-point pace. And that's probably who he is. Maybe a little bit lower, honestly, if these minutes continue. I'm close to dropping him, unfortunately. He reminds me a little bit of Mantha, a guy that I had very high hopes for, could have very easily been a sleeper, and it's just not panning out. And now the ceiling isn't there, so a streamer spot is worth more than what they're worth now, unfortunately.
I had Oliver Bjorkstrand as well. The editing's going to be fun on this one. My next one, and my first one, I suppose, since you took Bjorkstrand from me, is Torrey Krug.
Wait, hold on. Like the Torrey Krug on St. Louis or the Torrey Krug on Boston?
The Torrey Krug that went from Boston to St. Louis and the resulting catastrophe.
That's, are we sure we're talking about that guy? The guy we made the bet with about
that one.
Jay Theodore?
The one who's played a handful more games than Theodore and is still behind him.
Yeah, that guy.
Theodore has 10 and 10 and Krug has 9 and 16. That's not a good look.
I just wanted to make sure. Maybe we were talking about a different Krug. And
no, it's that one.
God.
It's that one. Yeah, it's bad. There's a lot of bad things involved as well. Let me talk you through them.
Oh, yeah.
So the biggest one that you actually could say is recoverable is his IPP dip. That probably will recover to some extent. So I don't necessarily think he's like actually he might be a half point per game player, but I do think that will come up a little bit. But the problem is that they've kind of split their power play, St. Louis at this point, and Falk doing as well as he's been doing is just like extra bad news for a struggling Krug. That power play 2 with Ryan O'Reilly and Hoffman and some decent players. Perron is on it, I think, at this point. That is the power play 1 to me now. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing that take the majority share of power play percentage time in games coming up, which just reduces Krug's value even more. So, yeah, I mean, I pointed at his IPP being lower than usual, but his on ice is higher than usual, so that's not good. And he's got a really high secondary assist rate, which we already talked about a couple of times what that means. It's not really reproducible. It's bad news for Krug to have that. So he's gotten kind of lucky to get some of the points that he's gotten. So you can point to some of these things like his IPP and like his power play point pace and say, oh, these are areas that should improve, and they should. But you can point to others like his high on ice shooting percentage and his secondary assist rate and be like, these are places where it should go down, and it will. And then his shot pace is down a little bit. I mean, he's never been the biggest shooter in the world, and he kind of had a big shot year last year compared to his average. So I'm not really looking into that too much. I think it's just Krug being Krug, and him shooting less than last season is probably expected anyway. But yeah, it's bad. Luckily, I feel like a lot of people in Cats leagues, especially if you listen to this show, probably didn't draft him super early. So maybe it's not the end of the world for you. And he's still a decent, he's actually blocking quite a bit more this season. So if you're going to blocks and hitting actually quite a bit more this season. So he is bringing some peripherals to go with, the lack of anything else. So silver lining there, I guess. But yeah, overall, it's not a pretty picture, and I don't think it's getting any better.
Yeah, no, it's not good. Makes me a little sad, honestly.
Yeah,
just a little bit. I'm glad I didn't draft him though.
Shea Theodore, on the other hand, is doing great.
I'm also very excited. People listen. If you're a patron member or a YouTube member, you get to listen live, and so we have these fun chats on the side. And someone just mentioned how Bjorkstrand probably in the next game is going to hear us call him sus low and just go off. Now Torrey Krug is probably going to. This has been happening all season. Like
happened to Teravainen. Happened to
every
Shea
player.
Theodore was the big one that happened to last season. I finally gave up, and I was like, maybe he is sus low, and then he went dominant mode for the entire rest of the season.
I swear, every player we've called sus low this season has just come back and destroyed for a little bit. Even Cam Atkinson, I had a bunch of candidates, crushes. Tim Stützle,
I hope your call
crushes.
on
Kyrou, crushes. Puljujärvi, crushes. After we call him a drop candidate, everybody that we label just goes off. It's just insane. Okay, my last one here, people. It's a duo, Elvis Merzlikins and Jonas Korpisalo.
Yeah,
I don't know.
By the way,
if they
Sorokin was on Sustainably Low 2 weeks ago.
Oh yeah,
Shut up.
Look, everybody that we mentioned. I don't know if it's bad luck or just that we suck at what we do. Maybe I'm getting to you. Maybe you're starting to become me a little bit more.
I still hold that Sorokin is sus low just because of start count, but it is funny to see.
Yeah, I don't know. It is funny. I'm curious to see what happens.
My last one is also Korpisalo, so go ahead. I may have something to add to it.
So Korpisalo is interesting. He's both playing worse on his own, and he's also being given a ridiculously, insanely difficult job at the moment. Let me just give you a few. Hopefully, as a goaltender, I feel like these numbers mean a lot more to me. I don't know if for the casual listener it makes as much sense, but I hope it kind of paints a picture of just how tough his job is right now. So his expected goals against per game has jumped 24%. His job has gotten harder. His rebounds against so far. So this is partially his own. This is partially on him for not controlling his rebounds. It's also about kind of where the shots come from. Last year, he had 101 rebounds against, so shots come off of a rebound. He's already at 45 this season, and rebounds are not safe plays. Usually, rebounds are very dangerous plays. On top of that, his average shot distance faced last year was 37 feet away. This year, it's come down to 30 feet away. That makes a big, big difference if the shooter is shooting from that close up.
That's really way closer than I have a few other, just to interject, I have a few other goalies on my chart here. Markstrom's average distance is 36.5. Matt Murray on the Ottawa, the famously amazing defensive squad of Ottawa, is at 35.7 feet. And Devin Dubnyk of the amazing defensive squad over in San Jose is at 36.5 average shot distance.
Insane.
So Korpisalo being at 30, almost 31, is it's a little dangerous. That means they're getting a lot of stuff attempts, a lot of really close shots on him.
For reference, Jonathan Bernier is at 33 feet away, and Korpisalo is at around 31. It's insane.
I don't know if there's a starting goalie that's has a shorter distance than he does.
I don't think there is. And so what's hurting him right now is his high danger save percentage. So shots that come, is he
Koskinen's 35.
Oh, there you go. So Korpisalo's got to have one of the toughest jobs in the NHL right now. And
Yeah.
his high danger save percentage has come down like crazy. Last year was 81%. That's a little bit better than average. The average high danger save percentage of the season so far is 78.6. He's sitting right now at 74.1. When you look at Elvis Merzlikins, this is really crazy. So last year he had an 84.6% high danger save percentage versus a league average of 78-ish, right? This year he's fallen to 66.7 high danger save percentage. He's getting roasted essentially on any shot that's coming in from high danger. And the thing is, what's really interesting is actually Merzlikins' average shot distance is 44, but Korpisalo's is 31. I don't completely understand why, but then you look at the average goal distance. The goal distance for Merzlikins is 15 feet. Korpisalo is 18 feet.
I think it's just volume.
Merzlikins is just getting crushed on those high danger. I think it's because of where the goals are coming from. Korpisalo has 12 games played. Merzlikins is 7. I think it's mostly just Merzlikins is getting just roasted on high danger shots, which are normally
Must be a lot of 2-1-1s and stuff.
So yeah, I'm low on both of them. I think they have a ridiculously difficult job in Columbus. For whatever reason, they've gotten terrible on defense, and on top of that, Korpisalo and Merzlikins aren't exactly being the lights out goaltenders that they were last year. So yeah, I'm low on them. I would drop, especially in a points league. No point.
Yep.
Yeah.
That does it. That does it.
That does it. So that is your Unsus episode. Long one today. Hopefully you enjoyed some heated debates. Let us know what you think about Malkin. Definitely go use that in-season tool if you haven't already. Otherwise, thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Yep. Thanks for listening.
Man, I've gotten so used to that. Thanks for listening. It's like it's music to my ears. I missed it last time. Anyways, peace.